What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and the fantasy football playoffs are here. It is Tuesday, so it's time to add some players off of waivers to get you ready for your championship run. We're going to talk through 10 to 15 players, all under 50% owned in ESPN leagues. You should go out there and add right now. As always, if you enjoy, leave a like, subscribe if you're new. Let's go.
VVS stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm frozen, she gon' let me.
Now, usually with these, we'll do priority ads, guys that I'm using all my fab budget on, the running backs, wide receivers, and so on. But we're so far in the season, and every week matters so much, I'm not going to give like my fab priorities. We're just going to talk running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, quarterbacks, and it just comes down to, do you need this player? Will he play for you this week? And if so, then bid accordingly is kind of my advice at this time of the year. You don't want to overthink it. You don't want to be like, oh, trying to play the budget game. No, it is single game elimination. If you need a player, go get him. Now, the funny thing is the entire year, the waiver wire has been dry. And I would say in week 15 here, this is probably as green as the running backs have been that I can remember. And first up, we'll talk about Patrick Taylor. Now, this is roughly ranked in the order of priority for me. We have Patrick Taylor. Of course, Garendo comes in, he crushes it, he scores 2 touchdowns, but like with all the other 49ers running backs, right? McCaffrey. Then we had Mason. We also had Elijah Mitchell in the offseason. Now, Garendo's here, and he suffered a foot sprain. Now, his availability for Thursday is to be determined, as said by Matt Barrows here. He said Shanahan said Garendo definitely couldn't have practiced today and said he'd be surprised if he can practice tomorrow. That's not great, and they know that Patrick Taylor will start if Garendo can't play. And the big thing is that this is a short week, so Garendo would have to suit up on Thursday Night Football. I believe it's the Rams versus the Niners. So this short week kind of plays to Patrick Taylor's favor. Now, what I will say is be cautious here. All right, this is the game log from last week. Patrick Taylor, after Isaiah Garendo went down. Are you guys killing me for this? Isaac Garendo. I sometimes say Isaac. I don't know. Is Isaac truly wrong? Like, I never say Isaiah. I say Isaac Garendo, but I'll say Isaac Garendo. Had 15 carries, 78 yards, 2 touchdowns. He had 2 catches, 50 yards through the air, but the next man up was Patrick Taylor, who had 7 carries for 25 yards and a touchdown. Not all that efficient, but he got more run and more carries than Deebo Samuel, than Keyshawn Vaughn, and I think most importantly, Kyle Juszczyk, who I thought could be maybe like a sneaky waiver wire ad, but if they gave carries to 5 different players and Juszczyk wasn't one of them, then I don't think that he has much value here in fantasy football. Now, honorable mentions, guys that I wouldn't go crazy for, but could be stashes here. Keyshawn Vaughn, right? He had 2 carries in this game. And then Izzy Abanikanda, the guy that the Jets drafted and then got picked up by the Niners. But it seems like Patrick Taylor, especially on a short week, will be the one who plays on Thursday. That'd be more of a stash for a bye week team and see if one of those guys emerges going into week 16 at that point. Now, Patrick Taylor, this is the scary part. I believe he went to Memphis and was kind of there during like the Tony Pollard, Kenneth Gainwell, Antonio Gibson era as like kind of a normal workhorse grinder. His best game in his entire career, 11 carries, 53 yards, a touchdown, 2 catches, 3 yards receiving. Not that great, but the 49ers do create a lot of fantasy points, especially for the running back position. So I do think that if he is the lead guy, if Garendo sits out, he'll be somebody probably in the fringe top 20s of my weekly rankings. Then we have Sincere McCormick, who we talked about yesterday, had an amazing role. He's still available in like 90% of ESPN leagues at this point. As JJ Zacharyson points out here, without Alexander Mattison and Zamir White once again, Sincere McCormick saw 15 of 16 running back rushes. His 24% route share wasn't great, but it was better than the 18% share he saw the previous week. His snap shares have gone from 11% to 38% to 62%. He had 17 opportunities this past week. It only turned into 10.9 PPR points, but he has been the lead back for this team, and I keep saying this. We've seen Antonio Pierce do this with Zamir White. Sincere McCormick could be that this year, where we see 15-plus touches from him from now on out, and he's somebody you can start in the fantasy playoffs. I will say the big thing to monitor will be Alexander Mattison and Zamir White if and when they come back, and if they do come back, if they eat into his workload at all. Now, our third player here was a bit of a shock. Tank Bigsby. He just completely flipped ETN this week, right? You can see here from the Fantasy Life utilization report, ETN goes from 52% of the snaps to 48%, but what ends up happening is he goes from 52% of the rush attempts, ETN, to 15%. Tank Bigsby ended up running less routes, but he ended up with 18 carries. You had 18 carries, 55 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown, 2 targets, 1 catch, 7 yards. He had 20 opportunities in a game with a healthy Travis Etienne. We don't know if this is going to stick, but it should be at least like 12 plus touches moving forward, projecting him moving forward throughout the rest of the fantasy playoffs. And if that's the case, he's somebody you can definitely throw in your lineup if you need to. A lot of running backs right now are shaky, whether that's Kenneth Walker, whether that's Breece Hall. Tank Bigsby, not all that bad, only rostered in 35.7% of ESPN leagues. Then we have Isaiah Davis. Now, this all comes down to how long you think Breece Hall is going to be out. My read, and I will say, my read wasn't that Isaiah Davis was going to get all this work. He ends up getting all this work. So you can take my read with a grain of salt. But it seems like Breece Hall is going to be out for a little bit. They honestly debated putting him on IR after the Indy game. He goes on the bye. He comes back, tries to play it out, and instead he re-injures his knee. In a lost season, I don't know how eager he's going to be to rush back. We'll simply see. But for now, with Breece Hall's status up in the air, you have Isaiah Davis here, where it's supposed to be the Braylon Allen show. You can see above Isaiah Davis here is the utilization report between Isaiah Davis and Braylon Allen. You can find that on fantasylife.com. And Braylon Allen had 56% of the snaps to Isaiah Davis' 52%, but they both had 16 opportunities. Isaiah Davis had the stuff in the passing game and in the red zone. He scores a touchdown. He gives you 10 carries, 40 yards on the ground, a touchdown. He gives you 3 catches on 6 targets as well. So that's good usage, but you have to remember in this game versus the Dolphins, they did have over 400 yards. Aaron Rodgers threw for 300 plus yards for the first time since 2021. That game environment is not going to be there every week moving forward. So he'll be more of like a fringy RB2, somewhere in like the RB25 range in the weekly rankings. Then our next running back here is Sean Tucker. This is a weird one. We have Bucky Irving out, sadly. Bucky Irving, who is looking like a league winner. You can see here from Jesse Morris in terms of a back injury. He was limited last week with hip and back injuries. His back injury flared up in week 14, causing him to be ineffective. Only 2.8 fantasy points on 4 rush attempts and 1 reception. Options could range from, who knows, between a strain, herniated disc. He said he'll be impressed if he's able to play in week 15, which is not good. Now, monitor practice, as always. We'll see what happens here. But if he can't go, Sean Tucker does have a 34.2 PPR point game under his belt from earlier this season, but with Bucky Irving hurt, he only had 5 opportunities to Rachaad White's like over 20. Rachaad White scored 2 touchdowns. It was the Rachaad White show, even without Bucky. So Sean Tucker's not someone you're going to start this week, but you add, you stash away, and you see what happens moving forward. And then our last running back we'll touch on is Kamani Vidal. We saw another flippening in the Los Angeles game. We'll see if this is more so the fact that they were playing from behind versus the Chiefs. I imagine that in positive game scripts, Gus Edwards will actually outsnap Kamani Vidal. But still, it's a big storyline where Gus Edwards gives you 10 carries, 36 yards, a touchdown. Kamani Vidal give you 8 carries, 34 yards, and a target. He's not someone you can really throw into your lineup immediately, but this Chargers offense will run the ball. They will score points, and if he's the lead back on this team, that is a valuable player to have moving forward. Now, let's move to the wide receivers. And the crazy part is that my number 1 receiver ad this week would be Adam Thielen. He's available in 2/3 of leagues right now. Ever since coming back with Bryce Young, he has been the wide receiver 9 with 17.3 points per game. And then I'll also throw out Xavier Legette, rookie wide receiver upside, but he just doesn't seem, honestly, it doesn't really seem, and I don't want to call it dead, but I don't know if we're going to get our Cinderella, Rashee Rice, Christian Watson, Amon-Ra St. Brown run. We were due one of these years to not have one of those, and it just seems like it's not going to happen at this point. All of the receivers that are doing well are guys that were drafted highly already, whether that's Brian Thomas Jr., whether that's Malik Neighbors, whether that's Ladd McConkey, who's now getting banged up. Ladd McConkey could be that guy, but you didn't really, maybe in shallow leagues you added him off of waivers, but Xavier Legette, looking rough, he is commanding a lot of volume. He's at 18% targets per out run, which for a rookie is impressive. That's what rookie CeeDee Lamb was at. Now, of course, he was next to Amari Cooper. Adam Thielen's not quite that same talent. He's also dropping touchdowns in the end zone. It's rough for Xavier Legette. I still don't mind stashing him, but he's purely a stash in deep leagues at this point. And then I will shout out the 2 Browns receivers. We have Cedric Tillman and we have Elijah Moore. Jameis Winston is absolutely electric in any game that he's in. If I'm desperate at flex, if I'm desperate at pass catcher, wide receiver, whatever, I want a Cleveland Brown over anything else. Anyone who's attached to Jameis Winston is good news. And it seems like Cedric Tillman should be back as soon as this week. Now, our last wide receiver we'll talk about here is Josh Palmer. This is if you're really desperate. But Ladd McConkey's been banged up. He could miss another week. And if Vlad McConkey misses another week, we could see another big Josh Palmer performance. He's coming off of 9 targets, 6 catches, 78 yards in his absence. Quentin Johnston, of course, if he's on waivers, is a great ad, but he's on waivers in only like 20 or 30% of leagues at this point. And then we'll get to tight ends. And this one's sneaky. I don't think that he's only rostered in 13.9% of ESPN leagues. Juwan Johnson. Ever since Taysom Hill has gotten hurt, he has been crushing it. Not crushing it, but usage has been amazing. Where if we look on the Fantasy Life utilization report here, Juwan Johnson, anything we're looking for is like over 70% of the routes, over 15% of the targets is really what we're aiming for from these tight ends. Juwan Johnson, since Taysom Hill went down, 79% of the routes, 19% of the targets, then 78% of the routes, 17% of the targets. In this past week, he had 5 targets, 4 catches, 50 yards, and a touchdown versus the Giants. Now, the big story is Derek Carr is hurt. So that's going to hurt his overall ceiling. But at the same time, he's still going to run those routes. He's still going to command those targets. And when tight end gets desperate, I would take routes and targets over praying for a touchdown. You can obviously do either or, right? You can do Juwan Johnson, or you could go for like a Noah Gray. I think either or are fine options. And then our last player here is quarterback. I hate that I'm even saying this, but it's Aaron Rodgers, who's quietly the QB 17. Of course, that's overall. He hasn't missed any games yet. But he's coming off his best game of the year where he had over 300 passing yards for the first time since 2021, and he gets a Jaguars defense this week that is allowing the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. He should be on waivers in most leagues. I do think that Aaron Rodgers is a fine streamer, and I will throw out Drake May as well if you have to go even deeper than that. He's playing versus the Cardinals, who are kind of like neutral, but it's going to be in a dome. Drake May, before his bye week, had a 20-plus point game. We could see him go crazy in a dome type of environment, but that's going to do it for us today. As always, shout out to Underdog Fantasy for keeping the lights on down here in the basement. Use promo code RONDOM after your first deposit up to $1,000. I'll have links in the description and the comment section down below. But if you can't support there, leave a like, subscribe. Good luck in your home leagues, in the fantasy playoffs, and I will see y'all in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold.